Happy Tuesday, Tyler.
Happy Tuesday. Well, I mean, I'll be honest, it is a
You're
Wednesday, but
right.
this is called Tuesday, so we're going to say it's Tuesday.
I know we'll get posted to YouTube on a Tuesday. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. All right. So topic today is going to be a little bit more of a conversation, less of an interview. But one of the things that has been on my mind is the tension of a salesperson, and
Mhm.
probably more specifically, salespeople at smaller organizations where there is major impact on budgets and expenses and financial goals and all those types of things that oftentimes salespeople have optics into. And
Mhm.
so I think some of the things that I've been thinking about that I wanted to talk about were, so the last year or year and a half, I guess, we've kind of been in this process of like, we have this far reaching financial goal that we want to hit. We have like a game plan to be able to get there. We
Mhm.
have hires that we want to make and expenses that hit and all those types of things. But then we also have the reality of like the zigzag line, right? To be able to get to that end goal. And so then like in certain leadership meetings and those types of things, you'll see hey, a client ended early or a client got acquired and we lost that revenue or whatever that might be. And so then you oftentimes, as the person leading the sales efforts, feel that, pressure of,
Mhm.
wait, there's this big goal, but now all of a sudden I just there's a hole that I have to fill up, but I also still
Mhm.
have to hit the goal.
Mhm.
So talk to me about like that impact, or even just you can expand on that thought too, but that impact for you, and then we can talk about some of the things we've learned about it.
Absolutely. And one of the things, even before diving into that, that I think is super important, the way that you've incentivized our sales team and me is to have clients that are good for the organization long term, not short term wins where I just get a percentage of what's closed.
Yeah.
So for me, my overall goal um, is for our company to make it, to be successful, to have revenue, and to hit our goals and to hit our growth goals. And so when, like you said, something falls short on, the client deliverable side, if it ends early, if a client gets acquired, all of those things, um, the gap between where we are and where we want to be, it just gets bigger. And so I am always paying attention to the gap, and always like that's the thing that like takes up most of my mental energy, is how do we fill that gap,
Yeah.
because I know the overarching number that we need to hit. um, and honestly, like, that's been a little bit of a struggle,
Mm-hmm.
because there are things outside of my control
Yeah.
that impact our overall goal as an organization. And as somebody who leads the revenue team, I'm responsible for revenue.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's what I'm responsible for. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I think it does. And I think, I'll also kind of have like a couple asterisks or caveats to this because we are a growth stage company right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in like optimization mode. I mean, I guess you always are in optimization mode, efficiency mode, but at the same standpoint, we're pushing towards a goal. We're not like settling for, hey, we've hit this year over year. We're
Right.
just trying to optimize for, maybe less clients with higher spends or whatever
Right.
it might be. We're actually trying to reach for what you said earlier, that longer goal. So some of our challenges with a sales department or a sales kind of team may be a little bit different than other people that are listening, but I think that helps. Okay, so what are some of the things? So we just went through our 2022 planning last week.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things, and you did an amazing job of kind of like giving some light nudges to the team of what that we've learned this year, as far as like those expenses and those expenses rising with maybe even hiring people or making certain decisions, but then also like, hey, that raises our revenue number, but then also like backfilling that and going, well, what happens when, different things kind of zigzag, like I mentioned before. What are some of the things that you feel like you learned, or like what I said earlier, nudge to get into the mix last week?
Well, I am a really optimistic and positive person, and I really believe that you get what you give. And so I've always thought, if I work hard, I can hit my goals. I can hit my goals. I can hit my goals.
Yeah.
And as a seller, I've been able to do that. But when we're growing an organization, there is a bandwidth that a person has, and you can't just be pie in the sky. We're going to increase our revenue by 200% with one person. We have some pretty awesome growth goals. They're not 200%, but there with some pretty awesome growth goals in the next few years. And looking at expanding our team and our capabilities and all of that. And so recognizing that in order to have, like, you have to have gas in the tank to get further.
Yeah.
And the gas in the tank is sales efforts.
Yeah.
And one person or a small team can only do so much until you have to add additional people to it. So I think being real, and the leadership, with the leadership team about how we want to grow our organization, that it can't just happen without having effort, and investment in revenue and in growth is super important.
Yeah.
And I think even like looking back on the previous year, making sure that revenue goals, they can be crazy high, but you have to invest in them in order to hit that amount. You can't just pretend like, oh, we haven't.
Yeah.
We haven't done that. But I've seen some organizations where it's just like, well, we're going to, we've done 30% year over year for a long time, so we're just going to keep doing that. Well, as you grow, that 30% is a higher revenue number and a higher revenue number and a higher revenue number. And you need to have the sales support in order to carry that.
Yep. No, that's super important. Okay. So and I'm just asking questions now because I'm curious your answers, and two, I've got a couple other things I want to get to too. What are some of the metrics that you have either identified this year as we've kind of gone through some of those bumps, or are putting in place for next year so that we can kind of start evaluating? Because that's also part of it. When you've got this plan, these financial goals out there, obviously we need to invest to be able to hit some of those, but you also have like that fuel in the tank, like you mentioned, to be able to get to some of those hires or some of those investments to pursue those bigger goals. What are some of the things that you're looking at, like on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, that help you be able to say, hey, this is a bad idea to push this forward, this is a good idea, as far as kind of those sales efforts and such? Super
good question. Most of them aren't revenue numbers. They are actually amount of sales meetings and length of close time on deals.
Yeah.
And also how many of our ideal customer profiles or personas are coming through. So if we've shifted our market a lot in the past year, so we have a lot more of our ICPs coming in. 90% of the leads coming in are great people for us to work with. The close time takes a little bit longer, and the amount of meetings that one person can hold in a week is limited. So like checking that is super important. And then also revenue overall, we have a number a metric that we have for how much revenue per person that's on our team that we need to hit. Yep. And so keeping that in check, but then also recognizing when you add a salesperson, if they're a valuable salesperson, they will make up their salary quickly.
Easily.
And so it's more around the capacity and the growth goals of the organization than it is even of sales metrics.
Yep.
So when we start getting to the point where that revenue per employee is really like where it's maybe a little too low and we need to add more revenue, then we know that that could be a chance where either there's a shift in the organization and we don't need to fill a role, or we need to, if we have growth goals, which we do, we need to look at adding a person that can help increase that value per employee.
Yeah. Super helpful. I think to reiterate some of that as well, one of the things that we do on a weekly basis is that we measure several different things.
For sure.
And so one of those is like sales meetings, like Amanda mentioned. There's deals, there's potential like revenue that's in the pipeline as you're kind of going through things, or contracts that are out there that you're waiting for.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that's been really interesting this year that we've started tracking is, so we have a sales pipeline, and there's different phases in that pipeline, starting from connection to discovery to strategy to proposal sent, waiting for client, and then either close one or close the lost.
Mm-hmm.
And every week we put a number for how many deals are in each of those different phases. And that's been super helpful from a like outside looking in standpoint, because I'm still involved in sales, but I have a step backward or a step back compared to what I have been. And so even from like, I guess for anybody listening from a management standpoint, having some of those numbers or metrics in place also helps you have more confidence in making some of those decisions, because we all know the word investment is like awesome, and everybody gets super pumped about, oh yeah, I made an investment, but also there's like a high level of risk in an investment. And so you have to be comfortable with that risk. And so some of the things that we've worked on to put in place help us have more comfort in the risks that we're taking and going, well, like I think a couple of weeks ago, we were at the most deals we've ever had in a pipeline. But we only know that because we've measured it, and it's pretty simple. It's just literally manually counting each of the deals, and we're not a massive company. So 25, 30 deals in our pipeline is awesome. And that's pretty easy to count. And so we just do it on the same day every week. But that's been really helpful. So I just would encourage people to like kind of put those different metrics or different kind of things on their scorecard, I'll call it in quotes, so that they can have comfort in some of those investments that they have to make to be able to hit their goals. That's all that I wanted to cover today. Anything you'd add to close this out?
I don't think so, but it is super important. I say I don't think so as I keep talking. it is super important to check that. And also, one of the things I really appreciate about you as a CEO is that you have reasonable expectations, and you know that you can't have somebody under your thumb and just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, because you're not going to get revenue from a sales team that's burned out or that sees no light at the end of the tunnel. And it's really important to lead that way, and to recognize that that is a resource that needs investment, that needs attention, and that, something just to always keep in check.
Yeah, if you're not a manager that has had, like, whether that's a manager of people or a CEO or whatever, and you haven't had sales experience, I would encourage you to start selling, because your expectations might change, or you might have a little bit more grace for people that are trying to hit those numbers. Because if you have spent a fair amount of time in the sales process, you understand that 30-40% is an amazing number for a close rate, which means you're going to get told no 6 or 7 times, right? But those 6 or 7 times might not be a perfect stat out of 10.
Right.
You might get told no 14 times in a row, but then you're going to get told yes however many times in a row, right? It doesn't, you have to look at it backwards, but it helps you give a little more grace as you manage people. And so if you are a manager and you don't have sales experience and you're managing salespeople, start selling, jumping on calls, get part of their world for a little bit, so you've got a little bit more I don't know, flexibility or willingness to be empathetic towards people.
100%. Awesome.
All right, thanks for the chat, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.